For years, I had poured my soul into the apple orchard that had been in my family for generations. Nestled in the rolling countryside, it was once a place of laughter, of long harvest days shared with family, of crisp autumn mornings where the scent of ripening fruit filled the air. But time had a way of stealing things away, leaving behind only memories and the quiet hum of solitude. Now, it was just me. My husband had been gone for years, our daughter, Sienna, off building a life of her own in the city. The orchard, once bursting with life, was beginning to wither, much like I felt I was. The season still came and went, the apples still grew and fell, but something was missing. I spent my days tending the trees, overseeing the workers, convincing myself that the work was enough to keep me fulfilled. But I knew the truth. I had grown weary of the silence, the absence of touch, of companionship. Then, one summer afternoon, everything changed. I had been searching for someone to help me restore the orchard, someone with new ideas, someone who could bring fresh energy into this place that had begun to feel like a relic of the past. That's when I found Nathan. He was young, far younger than I expected, with sun-kissed skin, strong hands that spoke of labor, and an easy confidence that made me uneasy in a way I hadn't felt in years. He had studied agriculture, specialized in revitalizing aging farms, and came highly recommended. I told myself that was why I hired him, because he was good at what he did. Because he could help. Because it had nothing to do with the way his eyes lingered a moment too long when we shook hands, or the way his laughter sent warmth through a place in me that had been cold for far too long. The first few weeks, I kept my distance. I told myself he was just another worker, here to do a job. I gave him instructions, observed his progress, and made sure we kept things strictly professional. But Nathan was impossible to ignore. He was full of life in a way I had forgotten how to be, moving through the orchard with effortless ease, talking about new methods for increasing the yield, sharing stories of places he'd worked before. His presence was a stark contrast to the stillness I had grown used to, and no matter how hard I tried, I found myself drawn to it. One evening, I watched him from my porch as he moved between the trees, the last golden rays of sunlight casting long shadows over the orchard. His shirt was damp with sweat from the day's labor, clinging to the strong lines of his body, and when he glanced up and saw me watching, he smiled. It was nothing, a polite acknowledgement, a casual moment, but my breath hitched all the same. I looked away quickly, chastising myself for the thoughts that had begun creeping into my mind. This was foolish. He was young, full of ambition and possibility. I was a woman who had spent too many years burying her desires beneath responsibility. And yet, as I sat there, feeling the warm evening breeze against my skin, I realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, I felt awake. As the summer days stretched on, Nathan became an unavoidable presence in my life. Each morning, he arrived early, his sleeves rolled up, ready to work. I told myself I was only watching him to ensure the orchard was in good hands, but the truth was harder to admit. There was something about the way he moved, the ease with which he carried himself, the quiet determination in his work, that held my attention longer than it should have. I tried to suppress the thoughts creeping into my mind. I buried myself in work, in the endless tasks that came with maintaining the orchard. I told myself that this was nothing more than admiration for someone dedicated to their craft, that I was simply appreciating his skills, his knowledge. And yet, I found myself lingering in places I knew he would be, just to hear him speak, just to watch him without reason. One afternoon, while I was inspecting a row of trees, Nathan approached me, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Your trees are responding well to the new method," he said, his voice warm, filled with quiet satisfaction. "The soil is healthier, and the yield should be stronger this season." I nodded, keeping my focus on the branches before me, afraid to meet his gaze. "That's good to hear. This orchard needs someone with fresh ideas." He hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. You work harder than anyone I've met. It's impressive. The compliment caught me off guard. I felt the warmth rise in my chest, an unfamiliar flutter in my stomach. I turned to look at him, and for the briefest moment, there was something unreadable in his eyes. A question. A curiosity. Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it had come. I cleared my throat, stepping back, needing distance. Hard work is the only way to keep something alive, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded but didn't move. The space between us felt charged, something unsaid lingering in the air. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, he gave me a small smile and stepped away, returning to his work as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something I couldn't name, something I wasn't ready to face. And as I walked back toward the house, my heart still racing, I knew that whatever this was, it wasn't going away. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, I caught sight of Nathan near the barn, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, his arms flexing with the movement. I tried to look away, to redirect my thoughts, but my gaze lingered. He had brought a kind of energy into my life that I hadn't felt in years, something youthful, something that made me acutely aware of the stillness that had settled into my bones. A soft breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, carrying with it the distant hum of crickets. It was the kind of evening that made me feel restless, like something was shifting inside me, something I wasn't sure I was ready to acknowledge. The next morning, I found myself dressing with more care than usual. A blouse that fit a little better, a brush run through my hair one extra time. It was absurd, of course. I was a grown woman, not a girl looking for attention. But as I stepped outside and saw Nathan standing by the apple crates, his back to me, something in me stirred again. He turned when he heard my footsteps, flashing me an easy smile. Good morning, he said. Morning, I replied, my voice softer than I intended. For the first time in years, I felt something close to excitement. And that terrified me. The days that followed felt like a slow, inevitable descent into something I couldn't control. Every glance, every casual brush of his arm as we worked side by side, every moment of shared silence between us, it all felt charged, heavy with something neither of us spoke aloud. I told myself it was harmless, that it was nothing more than fleeting admiration. But the truth nestled itself deep in my chest, undeniable. I craved his presence more than I should have. I found myself lingering outside longer in the evenings, hoping to catch a glimpse of him as he packed up for the day. My hands trembled slightly when they got too close to his, my breath caught in my throat when his gaze lingered a second too long. One night, the air thick with summer heat, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the open window, the distant hum of cicadas filling the night. Below, near the barn, I saw him, shirt slung over his shoulder, the dim light casting sharp shadows along the curve of his back. He was unaware of me watching, lost in whatever thoughts filled his mind. But I watched anyway, the weight of my own longing settling deep in my stomach. The next afternoon, we worked together in the orchard, the scent of ripe apples clinging to the air. The sun bore down on us, beads of sweat glistening on his skin. When he wiped his brow with the hem of his shirt, exposing a glimpse of taut muscle beneath, I had to force myself to look away. But my body betrayed me, a slow flush creeping up my neck, a stirring deep in my core that I hadn't felt in years. As I reached for a crate, my fingers brushed against his. He didn't pull away, and for a brief second, neither did I. My pulse hammered in my ears. His fingers, rough from work yet warm, rested against mine just long enough to send a ripple through me. A simple touch, innocent to anyone watching, but electric to me. That evening, when the house was quiet and he was in his room down the hall, I lay awake, my body still humming from that brief contact. I imagined what it would feel like to have him closer, to feel his warmth against me. My skin prickled at the thought, a mix of exhilaration and guilt coursing through me. I knew I was being reckless, but knowing didn't stop the way my body responded to him, the way my heart betrayed me each time he smiled. I told myself to stop, to walk away, to put an end to whatever this was before it became something I couldn't undo. But I also knew it was already too late. It happened in a moment of weakness, in a night heavy with tension and summer heat. I had spent the evening pretending everything was as it had always been, convincing myself that I had control over the thoughts that had consumed me. But as the house settled into silence, as the night deepened and shadows stretched along the wooden floor, I knew I was lying to myself. I left my bedroom without thinking. My body moved on instinct, drawn to the quiet glow of light spilling from under his door. My heart pounded as I approached, my breath unsteady. I told myself I was only going to check if he was still awake. Just a simple excuse. A reason to see him, to hear his voice in the hush of the night. I hesitated at the threshold, raising my hand to knock, but before I could, the door creaked open just slightly. He must have heard my footsteps. Nathan stood there, his gaze unreadable, his expression neither inviting nor dismissive. A silent question hung between us, thick and unspoken. I couldn't sleep, I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. He stepped back, allowing me inside, and I entered before I could stop myself. The air was thick, the space between us shrinking with each passing second. His room smelled faintly of cedar and sun-warmed fabric, an intimate scent that sent a fresh wave of awareness through me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the tension crackling in the air like a storm on the horizon. He shifted slightly, his eyes flickering toward mine before dropping to my lips, just for a second, just long enough to set every nerve in my body alight. I knew then that I had crossed a line. And I knew that neither of us would stop what was about to happen. His breath was warm as he reached for me, fingers brushing lightly against my wrist before trailing up my arm. A shiver coursed through me, anticipation curling in my stomach. His touch was hesitant at first, a silent request for permission, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I tilted my chin up, meeting his gaze, feeling the unspoken desire thrumming between us. When his hands settled on my waist, I felt the strength in them, the warmth that sent heat surging through me. My breath hitched as his fingers slid lower, tracing the curve of my back. My pulse roared in my ears as I leaned into him, my body answering before my mind could protest. His lips hovered just above mine, the space between us vanishing with a slow, deliberate pull. When he kissed me, it was gentle at first, testing, savoring, but the restraint didn't last. A soft moan escaped me as he deepened the kiss, his hands exploring, claiming, drawing me closer until there was nothing left between us but need. His mouth moved to my neck, trailing warmth along my skin, sending sparks through every inch of me. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, drinking in the sensation of him pressed against me. The tension that had simmered between us for weeks finally boiled over, no longer something we could ignore or deny. I gasped as he lifted me effortlessly, his grip firm as he carried me to the bed. My body melted into his, heat pooling low in my belly as he settled between my thighs, his breath ragged against my skin. My nails grazed over his back, feeling the taut muscles beneath, reveling in the way he responded to my touch. I had spent years denying myself, convincing myself that this part of me had faded with time. But in that moment, as his hands roamed my body, as his lips branded every inch of my skin, I knew the truth, I was still alive. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to feel. The morning after, reality set in like a cold wind cutting through the warmth of the night before. As I lay in bed, the remnants of his touch still tingling on my skin, my mind raced through the consequences of what had happened. The intimacy we had shared, the raw, undeniable need that had driven me to him, it had been real. But in the quiet light of dawn, something else settled in my chest. A question. A hesitation. I turned my head, expecting to find him beside me, but the space was empty. The sheets were cool where he had once been. My stomach tightened as I sat up, wrapping the sheet around myself. Their house was silent, too silent, the weight of the night before pressing down on me like a stone. Pushing aside the knot forming in my throat, I dressed quickly and made my way downstairs. Nathan was there, standing by the counter, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, a polite smile barely touching his lips. "Morning," he said casually, as if we hadn't crossed an irreversible line, as if I hadn't unraveled beneath his hands just hours ago. I hesitated. "Morning." The tension in the air was different now. Not the electric charge of longing, but something colder. More distant. I searched his face for something, anything, that would tell me last night had meant more than just an impulsive moment of passion. But there was nothing. Just polite detachment, an uncomfortable awareness that things had shifted in a way that neither of us knew how to handle. I wanted to say something, to break the fragile silence, but before I could, he glanced at his phone and exhaled lightly. "I should get going. Got a lot to do today." And just like that, he was moving past me, reaching for his bag as if nothing had changed. As if I hadn't been pressed against him, gasping his name, trembling beneath his touch. Something inside me ached, but I swallowed it down, forcing a smile. "Of course. I'll see you later." He nodded but didn't look back as he walked out the door, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, the taste of last night turning bitter on my tongue.